Welcome to Immigration Uncovered, the DocketWise video podcast. I'm James Pittman, co-founder of DocketWise, your host. And today we're going to be talking about golden visa programs across Europe. And I'm being joined by Andre Bothma, who is the founder of D7visa.com, an immigration consultancy firm. And he splits his time between Portugal, and Cape Town, South Africa. Andre, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So, Andre, can you just, by way of introduction, just introduce us to you and sort of how you got into this area?
James, my involvement in investment migration goes back to around 2017. I had previously done a lot of work in affiliate marketing and general online marketing, and was actually looking at an opportunity to move to Europe myself. And at the time, the only options that were really being promoted around here were golden visa ones. So I then went and did some investigations into getting a golden visa for myself at the time, and then realized that this would be a good commercial opportunity to exploit. So I then started working with golden visa suppliers. Weirdly enough, actually doing Hungarian residency by company formation. So that was my entry into the game, and then I have in subsequent years, worked very closely with a number of suppliers, in-country suppliers across both the citizenship and residency by investment programs. And then just prior to COVID, actually had stumbled on the D7 retirement visa as a product. And I realized that the total accessible market for a product like that would be substantially bigger, seeing as you don't have to invest to get it. So that was the genesis for the D7 visa product idea, and I mean, it's the rest kind of is history.
It's really a fascinating area, and it's one that's getting so much attention from people around the world who want to acquire a second residency. It's becoming something that's being discussed more and more by Americans, as well as people from other parts of the world. So let's dive in and talk about some of these programs. So can you first provide a brief overview of what golden visa programs actually are and what's their appeal to investors?
Certainly. Golden visas differ from many other conventional routes to residency in that you are not obligated to go and live in the country once you get your residency permit. For just about every other type of residency outside of the investment space, the expectation would be that you go and settle in the country full time or very close to full time. And that necessarily has implications for the hub, whether you fall into their tax net or whatever the case may be. So, whereas a simple way to phrase it is that on a golden visa, you have the option to go and live in a country full time, but not the obligation to do so. So it's kind of a cool option for another place to call home, in the event that social, economic, or political situations were to deteriorate back home.
Yes, it's always good to have a plan B or an insurance policy, as it were.
Indeed, yeah. So the D7s would basically be a plan A kind of play, whereas the golden visas would be a plan B.
So now, is that a generic term or that's specific to a particular country?
The D naming convention is specific to, well, I mean, D7 and D8 would be specific to Portugal, the one being the retirement visa and the other one being the digital nomad visa. Technically, when you apply for the settlement visa, it's a D category visa, hence the name. So it's a settlement visa. But if you were to deal with your local consulate, they would probably advise you just to state that you're seeking temporary residency. They may not necessarily call it a D7 or a D8 on the application form, but the categorization for that has various grounds upon which they will allocate your residency permit. And the D7, in inverted commas, route would be for people with passive income, typically retirees. On the D8, it's typically active income, and that would be then for people with foreign sourced salaried income, that is, either on a contract basis or on a freelance contract basis.
Okay, very interesting. Let's talk about some specific programs. Let's start with Portugal, which is where you spend a lot of your time. So with Portugal's golden visa being one of a few remaining in Europe, what factors do you think contribute to its resilience? Why has it persisted? amidst what we see are growing pressures around the EU to kind of curtail such programs?
I think that the obvious draw card in Portugal is the fact that you can become eligible to apply for citizenship after 5 years, only having spent an average of 1 week per year on the ground. Now, a key benefit of a golden visa residency, and I mean that goes for most European golden visa residency programs, is that you don't really need to spend any time on the ground. In Portugal, it's the minimum is a week, but in Italy or in Greece or in Spain, even it's 0 days per year. But uh, that presupposes that you only want to keep on renewing your temporary residency permit indefinitely. In all of those countries, if you want to actually naturalize to become a citizen, you need to spend more than 6 months per year on the ground and often more time to be eligible to get the passport. So, whereas in Portugal, you could literally do 1 to 2 weeks per year on average. Um, and as long as you are able to speak basic Portuguese, you'll be eligible to apply for first permanent residency and then a passport. So, for applicants not only looking for a backup call option, but also for a route to an actual citizenship and a passport, Portugal's the obvious choice.
So, can you elaborate now on a new visa, which is Portugal's startup co-investor visa? This came into existence in 2024. And how is that sort of an alternative to the traditional golden visa?
The startup co-investor visa is effectively a packaged version of the IAPME startup visa. So it's kind of the done for you option. I've got a couple of notes on that, if I may, but effectively, it's a matchmaker service that connects foreign capital and know-how with eligible startups, high potential startups in Portugal. So, on the basis of making an investment and partaking in the capital of a startup, you then effectively become a co-founder of that startup, which serves as the rationale and the basis for getting the residency permit.
What's the amount of capital they're asking?
It's typically 150,000 euros, or from
Mhm.
150,000 euros, depending on the nature of the startup and its capital requirements.
So not astronomical, definitely doable from an.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a component of that 150,000 goes towards actual just program participation fees. The actual capitalization into the startup is lower.
And what has the reception been so far since it's new? What can you tell?
It's been very positive, and I mean, we've had a fair tsunami of inquiries considering it's a new program. It was developed by a firm based in Porto, which is where I'm based, called Visa Doro Golden Visas. So they're quite actively involved in the cultural Golden Visa program as well, but this is one of their in-house developed uh, programs leveraging the IAPME startup visa channel.
And let's talk about what sort of the rights are that are granted once you have a co-investor visa. I mean, does it have to be renewed? Is it permanent? Are you getting residency?
Yeah, so the residency permits in Portugal have now been sort of normalized in that you'll first get it for 2 years and then it's renewable in 3 year increments thereafter. Unless after 5 years you choose to apply for permanent residency, at which point that will take another year or a year and a half, depending on how the processing backlog is dealt with. I mean, we can talk about that in a bit. But it gives you the same route to citizenship, permanent residency, citizenship, and a passport as the D7, for example. Um, and it also has I mean, on paper, it has the requirement for you to spend, more than 6 months on the ground. But typically, the startup co-founder's role would be to market their startup internationally. So on that basis, you can apply for a exception to the minimum stay requirements when you apply for the residency permit. So again, you start with a D-type settlement visa, which is good for 2 entries in 4 months. You'll use that visa unless of course you're from the States where you already have visa-free access, then you can basically come to Portugal directly and do your biometrics appointment, after which they then issue with the residency card. This particular kind of residency application is what they call priority. Uh, it's a priority residency. So the advantage of this is that it gets processed substantially faster than the golden visa residency permits. Again, we can talk about that in a bit, but the waiting period on the golden visa has been between 2 and 4 years.
Oh, wow.
Just to, I mean, I'm in the peculiar situation that my spouse is still a tourist in Portugal, where I've
Mm.
already renewed my first. I'm on a 3-year residency permit already, and it's just been impossible to get residency appointments.
Well, I want to shift over to the situation in Spain a little bit because there's important changes going on. One of the changes that is that Spain has announced a 100% tax on real estate purchases by foreigners. And this will affect all real estate purchases, whether they are connected with migration or not. So, can you give us some background about what brought about this development and what its implications are?
I take a fairly jaundiced view on this particular topic, in that golden visa programs have become a political football across Europe.
Yes.
And um, obviously, worldwide, the economy is such that people are starting to feel the pinch. And whenever that happens, people become disgruntled and they look for scapegoats. And what better scapegoat than a voiceless, teeny tiny minority of affluent foreigners who can't defend themselves? It's a typical straw man argument. So the loose logic goes that golden visa investors, I mean, 400 of them per year in Spain, have accounted. And I mean, Spain is a big country, make no mistake. So those 400 property investors have sparked a speculative bubble, which has now pushed up housing prices across Spain. And by terminating the golden visa program, we will be able to reduce property prices for the man in the street. That's kind of the logic. Um, uh, the maths doesn't really stack up. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the total transactions in Portugal, or in Spain, and in Portugal for that matter. So the canceling the golden visa programs won't address the shortage of supply, nor the fact that property developers in these places are disincentivized to invest and to build property. So yeah, it's an optics management exercise for the most part, and 100% tax um, on foreign property purchases won't fix the problem either, for the same reasons. I mean, and frankly, northern Europeans, the French, the German, the Danish, will still continue buying properties in sunny Spain, and they'll be able to do that without the 100% tax on top. So um, I think these things are symbolic, and it's certainly, in my mind at least, political point scoring.
Understood, understood. Now Spain is actually phasing out the golden visa program, in April is what you had mentioned to me earlier, just before we came on. You wanted to talk about sort of that as well?
Yeah, again, frustrating if one works in the investment migration industry, because obviously we've had a lot of programs shuttered in recent years. The stated objective is to prevent speculation, property market speculation. I don't think it's going to do that. I don't think that it was particularly a problem. These weren't people buying properties to flip them; they were keeping them as beach houses and second homes. So the medicine won't treat the disease, as far as I'm concerned. Spain was a decent program. It was a very fast and efficient program in terms of processing times and general predictability of of what it would look like when you apply. They also they're busy canceling things like the bank deposit option, which was substantially more. Um, so it's a bit disingenuous, but it's the reality is that investment migration is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and demand for second options, demand for backup plans, demand for somewhere to go if things go wrong back home is not going to dry up, no matter what Brussels says or thinks about it. And there's a seminal court case going down between Malta and the European Commission as we speak. And every indication, and that's not my opinion, that's coming from top brass legal experts in Europe, is that the EC will lose the court case. So we've had a slight lull in new programs coming online in the last 2 years, because a lot of countries in Europe were taking a bit of a wait and see approach. Um, Albania shuttered or discontinued their plans to launch a citizenship or investment program because of pressure from Brussels. Montenegro has also been sitting on their hands waiting for that outcome. But I mean, there are more than qualified rumors suggesting that the Montenegrin program will come back in the event that Malta wins its case. And I think that we can then look forward to a fair few more countries in continental Europe launching similar programs. We've just had a program launched in Sierra Leone, actually, which is interesting. So, I mean, and not that an African program is necessarily going to become the next Greece or the next Portugal. But yeah, I mean, there's been a couple of new launches in recent times, and I'm pretty hopeful that, and pretty confident we're going to see more of those in the next few years.
Out of curiosity, is that the first of its kind on the African continent?
Well, Comores had a pretty controversial program as well. I mean, that's obviously not continental Africa, that's an island off the coast of Africa. Mauritius has a residency by investment type golden visa program as well. But in terms of actual citizenship by investment, I do believe it's one of the first, if not the first.
Quite interesting. We'll have to we'll have to see how that develops. It's something to follow. Whether developing countries are going to try to, let's say, compete or throw their hat in the ring as as the EU continues to try to dissuade countries from having golden visa programs.
I mean, the world is changing fast at this stage.
Yes, for
And
sure.
if memory serves, around 2035, Africa will have the world's largest workforce by headcount.
Yes.
So, um, I mean, yeah, Sierra Leone has quite a checkered past, but they've got a pretty progressive government in place right now, and these guys are very keen to turn things around. And I mean, obviously, it's a developing country, so there will be a lot of challenges, but I think commensurately there'll also be a lot of opportunities. So, yeah, it's one to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. Let's talk about an old favorite, which is Greece. Certainly one of my favorite destinations. Now, Greece has recently tightened its golden visa rules, and they've increased the minimum investment threshold, and they're actually imposing some restrictions on property usage. So let's talk a little bit about the background of these developments, yeah, and what the implications are.
So, the housing crises have kind of sprouted up across continental Europe. It's not a Spain specific problem. I mean, Portugal
Right.
has an acute housing shortage, which has been exacerbated by the arrival of um, a great many Ukrainian and Russian nationals. But quite frankly, is also exacerbated by seasonal over tourism and stuff like that. So the problem is not dissimilar in the major Greek cities, especially Athens and Thessaloniki, and that becomes a political headache for the local government. So, with a view to address the program without throwing the baby out with the proverbial bathwater, Greece then said, "Okay, we're going to push the prices up to get the volume down on this. We are going to prevent you from using your property as an Airbnb property under certain circumstances and locations. And if you want to buy in, those prime kind of places, like, the their sort of most popular islands and the city centers, then you need to buy property with a minimum size of 120 square meters. Fortunately, however, they have introduced an additional category called the conversion property category. Now, that involves taking either a commercial property like a factory or a mall or some sort of a commercial space and converting it into residential units. For properties like that, you can still get away with an investment of 250,000 euros. And that actually happily enables you to invest in the city center in Athens or Thessaloniki as well. So even though in those areas you're looking at a a standard rate of 800,000 euros, you can still get away for 250 to this day.
So we want to distinguish the golden visa from another visa that Greece has, which is also very important, which is the financially independent person or FIP visa. So let's distinguish these two and talk about the FIP a little bit.
Okay, so the FIP visa is not dissimilar to the Portuguese D7 visa, and you'll find similar flavors of that in places like Italy, where it's referred to as the elective residency visa, or in Spain, it's known as the non-lucrative visa. Across all of these programs, applicants typically have to have passive stable income, and whilst you can apply on the basis of savings only in Spain, in the other countries, they typically prefer to see stable passive income in the form of property rental income or sort of royalties or something in that line. Yeah, I mean, it's a visa category that leads to a residency permit for people wishing to settle in the country pretty much full time, rather than serving as a backup option. And it's been fairly popular, but on the FIP, the and I mean, I'm not exactly privy to why, but there have been delays in terms of the processing on that visa. So I'm not sure what the exact status is in 2025, but towards the tail end of 2024, people were having a hard time getting it.
I would think that these visas are quite popular. I mean, in terms of Spain with the non-lucrative and Greece with the FIP. I mean, have these become popular options? Do you see a lot of takers?
The D7 has been one of the most popular ones, and more popular in our experience by several orders of magnitude. And the primary reason for that is that on paper at least, the D7 has a very low minimum income threshold. So in 2025, for example, the minimum passive income requirement for a single applicant is 870 euros per month. Having said that, though, I mean, you're going to spend more than that renting a property practically anywhere in Portugal. So it doesn't, even though that is and I mean, it's kind of connected to, the minimum wage in the country, but 870 won't get you far. And in all likelihood, that won't be sufficient to convince the Portuguese authorities to grant you the residency visa.
All right. Well, let's skip over just a bit to Italy, and let's talk about Italy's golden visa program. What are their thresholds and the benefits associated with Italy as distinguished from the others?
The Italian visa is unique in many respects, but first and foremost, it's unique in the fact that it never had a residency by property acquisition channel. I mean, so you could never go and buy yourself a second home there to obtain a golden visa. Whereas in Greece, in Portugal, and Spain, those were options available to you. Well, I mean, it's still available in Greece, but the other ones, Portugal shuttered that some years ago, and Spain's about to go away in its entirety. So on the Italian program, you don't have the option of purchasing a home, which means that they don't run into obstacles with rising property prices being blamed on foreigners and or on the golden visa program. In Italy, the program is known as the Italian investor visa. It's not known as a golden visa per se, although it is the same thing. In as much as once you have your residency permit, you don't need to spend any time in the country unless you want to, but you also have the option of spending 365 days per year living there, should you choose. So that's the one benefit, is that it's got no minimum stay requirements. It's very quick. It can be up to, I mean, within 3 to 4 months, you can have your residency permits in hand. And then another compelling benefit is the fact that you only have to invest. You only have to commit your capital once you've been issued your residency. So that removes any kind of like program risk. Whereas, I mean, in most, if not all of these other countries we've been talking about, you first need to invest and then go and apply for your residency permit off the back of being able to prove the investment. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty attractive. As for your investment choices in Italy, they're fairly interesting as well. Starting from the cheapest, it's a 250,000 euro investment in an innovative startup that has to be in an eligible database of startups. But startup investments are obviously very high risk. So I typically invest, I mean, things, there are programs coming online that will de-risk things to a certain extent. But as of today, I would typically refer to those as the donation-based option, because you're probably going to see your money dropping into a startup hole and not get it back. Which, I mean, on a sort of a price point, would align pretty well with the Portuguese cultural golden visa, which is also pretty much a startup for the most part, a donation for the most part. So yeah, 250 onto a startup, or you have the option of investing 500,000 euros in either the stocks or shares of a Italian company. Now, there are many ways to skin a cat here, but especially in the last year or year and a half, we've seen more done-for-you packaged options coming online here too. And whilst you could buy property in Portugal and Greece and Spain, no one really paid too much attention to the Italian program. But now with Spain gone, Hungary's 500,000 euro property acquisition option being scrapped, and Portugal no longer being an option, people are starting to look at Italy in a new light. So the two options that I'm getting a lot of inquiries for is the regulated real estate fund, which invests in hospitality assets. So they don't take any build or licensing risk. They'll go and invest in properties that are 4-star rated, convert them to a 5-star rating, and then commensurately be able to charge higher rates. So that is a 10-year option with the ability to walk away after 5 years. And I mean, that gives you the sort of the assurance of a bricks and mortar, tried and true business model, presented by very expert kind of operators in that space. The other option is a curated portfolio of classic Italian stocks, which kind of have for the last decade or so performed really well, and should, all other things being equal, perform pretty well going forward. That option has the advantage that you have annual liquidity. So if your plans or your life situation changes and you want to give up on your Italian residency permits, you can exit that once per year. So I mean, yeah, it's been underrated for a long time. Obviously, the commissions involved in property deals are higher, which means that the entire industry, investment migration industry, were incentivized to focus on real estate-based programs rather than the other ones. But yeah, I think we'll see a lot more activity on the Italian front in the year to come, especially now with the return of Donald Trump to the Oval Office.
Indeed. It's one of the it's a huge driver, it's something I think I'm going to be following is the rate of expatriation, or yes, the rate of expatriation from the United States is
We've seen
something which you're seeing it already,
a
and you'll
dramatic
see.
increase in this since last year already.
Absolutely. The number of people talking about it as an option has just increased dramatically over the last 10 years, and is poised for or is in the process of another spike, I'm sure.
Indeed.
And it's something we'll talk about again. I feel confident. Um, in Hungary, which is uh, possibly not the first one that pops to mind when you think about these types of visa, but they introduced a new program in 2024 with a quite nice price point for investment of 250,000 euros. So let's just contrast this with some of the others in Europe in terms of its benefits and requirements.
I had high hopes for the Hungarian program, the new guest investor visa. And I mean, it ran about a year late in coming online, properly coming online and starting to process applications. Um, during which time I had about 300 or 400 inquiries from highly motivated prospects. So I was pretty excited about this. And then the delays kind of like ran into late 2024. And are what we ended up with was a shadow of what was expected. So I am mindful of how and when I criticize programs like this, because it's a pretty small industry. But um, apart from the delays, let's look at the entry point program, the 250,000 euro real estate fund. Firstly, it's a 0% yield option, which you effectively need to keep for up to 11 years to be able to renew your 10-year residency permit for a second 10-year period. And it's not guaranteed that you will need it, but whilst it's not crystal clear yet, it would be advisable to keep the investment in place for 11 years up until you've got your second 10-year residency permit. So that's a serious opportunity cost, even on a 250K investment. To add insult to injury, the processing fee to that is a whopping 60,000 euros. Now that harks back to the days of the 300,000 euro Hungarian bond program. But if you go and look at what you typically end up spending in fees and processing costs for all of the other programs, I mean, that's several orders of magnitude more. So we've been seeing pushback from the market where people just say, look, it's a 250K investment, 60K in fees just doesn't make any sense. I'd rather go to Greece where I can buy an off-plan or a converted property for 260,000 euros all in, and I have the underlying asset which I can use. So on a fee structure point of view, it doesn't make any sense either. And this is perhaps one of the more sensitive points about it, but it's a very non-liberalized agent structure. I mean, there are very few people from whom you can purchase this, in addition to there only being one fund approved to invest in. So it just doesn't kind of like empower the consumer with choice. And everyone, well, not everybody, but a great number of clients were holding out for the 500,000 euro option because they wanted to buy a property in Budapest, which we can either have their children use while they study there or, as a second home or whatever the case is. But with that off the table, the 250K option looking pretty lackluster, the uptake has been negligible.
I would think that perhaps they're going to have to do a substantial amount of tinkering with it, or really maybe even major revision to it before it actually becomes a viable option or desirable option. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the market decides, as I wrote a while ago, that which programs will flourish and which won't. And until such time as they do that tinkering and tweak it up to look more market related, I think they're going to struggle getting massive traction.
And I think that the political and cultural climate in Hungary doesn't help matters either. Um, it's a country which has really kind of retreated a lot from liberal values, and taken some contentious positions, vis-a-vis the rest of the EU. So I
They
would think it,
have. Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, Orban certainly has done exactly that. Uh, I typically tell clients too that if you don't like the program, you're not necessarily the target audience for it. There are many folk for whom that kind of more culturally conservative, Christian conservative kind of space makes sense, and for whom that is attractive. So yeah, it depends who we ask.
Well, in Malta, which is who has for many, many decades been a favored retirement destination, particularly for the British, they have both a golden visa and a citizenship by investment program. Now,
Indeed.
let's talk about the differences between these options and other relevant factors, operating in Malta with, I mean, it's a rather crowded island, frankly. And let's talk about that in terms of, and also with regard to the real estate situation there.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, it is the island option. It's not in continental Europe. So if you don't want to live on an island, that would be the place for you. Having said that, the Maltese Golden Visa, the Maltese Permanent Residency Program, as it is formally known, is a great deal. It's one of the only two programs of its sort that give you permanent residency status straight off the bat. Cyprus is the other one. And it's an affordable option. You have the option to either rent a property for 5 years or to purchase a property, the pricing on the property as well as the processing fees and some bits and pieces associated with that have gone up. So whereas you could probably, until the end of last year, have gotten away for about 150,000 euros if you were to rent a property, you're probably looking at slightly over 200,000 now. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a good option. It's a good value buy. It's predictable. It's relatively fast, and you get an English speaking environment. Now, that would kind of be the Toyota Corolla, whereas the citizenship program, and I mean, it's clunkily known as the Citizenship by Exceptional Services for Investment program. And I got that right the first time. Um, yeah, you have the option of renting a property to do that too, but then you're looking at north of 690,000 euros. And if you were to purchase a property, that goes up to maybe 1.3 million euros. And that is for the standard residency track, which is 36 months until you become a citizen and can apply for your passport. If you want the 12-month track, then that the non-refundable investment amount goes up to a whopping 750,000 euros. So that we typically trot out for billionaires. Ultra high net worth clientele are the only people who can really afford to throw 1.5 million or thereabouts at a problem like this. But yeah, both are excellent options. And as I mentioned previously, I'm pretty pleased with the prospect that Malta will win their case against the EC.
Let's let the audience know what the case is about.
The European Commission is of the opinion that Malta hosting a citizenship by investment program is contrary to the values and laws of the European Union. The preceding kind of legal structure was that every nation state gets to naturalize whomever they so choose. And I mean, the European Union as a trade bloc would have been nice, but now it's become more of a supranational government structure, and they are trying to control what their member states do. I think there is a distinct ideological underpinning to this, and I mean that sort of sense of what is just and equitable, and the equality of outcomes they strive to achieve for all of their member states' citizens is key to this. The idea that you can buy your way in and get VIP treatment doesn't sit well within the general project that is the European Union. So, yeah, I mean, I think they're fundamentally against people getting the sort of red carpet treatment. The accusations or the concerns raised is that these programs pose a risk for, you know, bad actors getting into the EU by the back door, as it were. But the reality is that, I mean, the EU have welcomed scores of refugees, and the amount of bad actors that walked across their borders during that kind of period would have been substantially greater. And quite frankly, I mean, if you can imagine a Mexican cartel boss, they're not going to apply for a temporary residency permit. What they'll probably do is forge papers, prove ancestral citizenship, and then get a passport straight off the bat. So it's completely far-fetched that a criminal actor of that description would apply for a golden visa. It just doesn't work that way. So yeah, I think that many of the concerns raised are largely unfounded, if not 100% unfounded. And it would appear that the European judges are going to find to agree with that.
Let's move on to another island, shall we? Which would be Cyprus, which is another of my favorite destinations, and would probably make my own short list of if I were considering these programs. But what are the latest developments in Cyprus's Golden Visa program, and how does it stand out among European residency options?
Cyprus is an interesting, a very interesting option with with one key deficiency. Um, because they've got a territorial dispute with northern Cyprus, which is Turkish administered. Um, they have been unable to join the Schengen zone, and which means that residents in Cyprus cannot enjoy visa-free travel within the European Union, the Schengen area. So for people looking to obtain the ability to travel in Europe visa free, it's not an option that made a lot of sense thus far. During last year, there was talk that they were actually going to reduce the investment requirement, and that would have been very exciting had that come to pass, because Cyprus is now one of the few remaining countries where you can buy residential property of your choosing, and get a golden visa. The one caveat is that it has to be a new off-plan property. You can't get a resale property in Cyprus and get a golden visa. So you typically need to buy it from a property developer. Having said that, the news broke sort of a week ago, I do believe, that Cyprus is very close to gaining access to the Schengen zone. And um, I mean, a lawyer that commented on one of my LinkedIn posts made the point and said he wonders how they're going to resolve that territorial dispute with Northern Cyprus, because effectively what would need to happen is that the green line or green zone or whatever they call the no man's land between the two, yeah, would need to become a hard EU border. But I mean, we're living in uncertain times, and I think that the EU would be eager to grow their footprint in these times. So the Cypriot president made the announcement, so it seems to be serious. And I actually spoke with one of my suppliers on the ground there last night, um, who was in touch with a very high-ranking government official, and it appears that it is very much in the works, and that this visa-free status could actually be in place by as early as 2027. Um, at which point, the Cypriot permanent residency program, the Golden Visa, would become a lot more appealing. And the intrinsic value of the product would be a lot higher, which, if that were to happen, it's pretty likely that the authorities would then decide to increase the price, the minimum investment requirement, rather than to reduce it, as they were previously intending on doing when they still didn't have Schengen access.
And Andre, if memory serves correctly, was there a citizenship by investment option that was phased out in Cyprus?
Yeah, it was phased out amidst a fair amount of controversy, and allegations of improper behavior and lacking due diligence, amongst other issues. It was also a property-based option, whereby if you bought a villa for 2 million and some change, you could then get a separate passport, which is a powerful travel document. So, yeah, I mean, that court case, well, it's actually a criminal trial, is ongoing as we speak too.
Interesting.
Um, but yeah, it's that was an exceptionally attractive program, and I mean, it, it, it's a shame that it's gone. I would like to see a version two of that coming back at some stage, but the consensus is that it's not yet the time for it. They've also been revoking a fair volume of passports where people materially misrepresented their circumstances or their bona fides.
Well, Cyprus is gonna be one to follow because it's, it's one of the most attractive destinations, and yet it has this intractable political situation. Do you handle anything, now this is going a little bit askance, but, with regard to, residency in Northern Cyprus?
Northern Cyprus is only recognized by Turkey as a
Mhm.
nation state. So it's I'm aware that there have been, let's call them influencers in the space who have been promoting property there, but I think that's a very risky turf.
Risky because you don't know how the political situation is ultimately gonna shake out if and when they ever get around to some resolution, and there's still lots of cases, by former residents of Greeks who were forced to leave the North, who claim that their properties were confiscated. So it
Exactly.
seems to have some inherent risk, that, you could there's the potential in the future that you could lose the rights to the property. You don't know. There's always
Or
that.
that you criminally acquired someone else's property
Right.
effectively. So hence, I
Effectively.
would I would give that a wide berth.
Mhm. All right. Austria, in the heart of Central Europe, certainly a lovely country by anyone's standard. Can you tell us about their residency by investment program and who does that appeal to?
So Austria, I mean, first and foremost, it's worth noting that Austria does not have a formalized residency by investment program. They have a discretionary citizenship by investment program, which is more well known, if nothing else. But it's typically you're looking at an investment of around 8 million euros, and it has to be an active investment in the economy. The other thing to note with Austria is that while some investors who have obtained naturalization based on these investments have managed to keep their existing citizenship status, the Austrians typically require you to give up your native passport if you become an Austrian citizen.
Okay, so right away we've sort of limited its attractiveness. First of all, it's certainly, not gonna be one of the more budget-friendly destinations, and yeah, and so both the requirement, the financial requirement, as well as, the potential exclusivity of having Austrian citizenship only is certainly something that's gonna dramatically limit its appeal.
Yeah, the timeline to apply can also be anywhere between a couple of months and 3 years, depending on the size of the investment. So yeah, it's a classy place. It's a stable place, and for dynastic operators, I mean, it's a good one because it's not going to draw any of the kind of criticism that the mainstream, more affordable programs would. Um, but yeah, I mean, it certainly is a product for the rarefied few. As for the residency options, Austria doesn't have a formal residency by investment program, so there's no golden visa per se, but there are a number of done for you package options whereby you can gain a golden visa equivalent residency permit in Austria. The Austrian so-called higher status residency permits are extremely limited in number, so they're relatively hard to get hold of. And the Austrian bureaucracy is arguably, well, I mean, immigration bureaucracies are hard to navigate by design because they intended to throttle volume of people moving to a particular place. So, um, yeah, working with a concierge product, like a white glove service provider on the ground that can give you access to, um, in this instance, a 2-year job contract, which is then converted into something like the financially independent program in Greece, is a viable option to get in the door. Um, and you can then also basically come and go as you please. Subject to language proficiency requirements, you can also naturalize in due course. Um, so yeah, I mean there are options. Austria is not a plan B destination that comes to mind for a great many people. Is it an action? Well, provided that you can get the plan B access to it via one of these higher status residency permits, it's an excellent place to have in your back pocket. Um, but for the most part, people looking for plan B options like real estate, or they like being able to make a nominal return on investment whilst having their capital pretty well shielded from risk. Whereas in the Austrian program that I mentioned, you're looking at a sunk cost. So you have a pretty chunky kind of fee to participate in the program, and you need to then sponsor your salary for 2 years on top of that, to the tune of 70,000 euros per year. But when all is said and done, you're looking at about 230,000 euros to get this kind of flexible residency there. And that would compare pretty well with the Portuguese golden visa, or, even the startup co-investor visa price wise.
Understood. So it's certainly, as you said, certainly a classy place and very, very, very lovely. It seems like that just it's one that its particular prerequisites and situation and so forth makes it. You have to have the right customer for whom I think that one would be the right fit.
Yeah, what is useful about it is that Russians can apply for this particular program, whereas as for the rest of the golden visas in Europe, they're no longer eligible to apply there.
Now, is that by sort of fiat of the EU, or how's that come about?
Well, it's not a golden visa program, and the Austrians obviously decide what they do. Um, Curiously, in Portugal, when the war in Ukraine broke out, the Portuguese uh, bureaucracy stopped processing Russian golden visa applications. But there was never a legal mandate for them to do so. There was no law passed in Portugal that compelled them to do it. They just kind of followed suit, as it were, for a while. But I mean, Russian applications are now being processed again. So yeah, no, I think that there's a bit of a you know a, in the spirit of being part of the EU, countries follow suit.
So, Andre, I mean, sometimes it's an evolving landscape, and there are a lot of changes that are influenced by the politics and governments coming into power. So sometimes these programs, can be phased out pretty quickly. I mean, how do sudden policy changes in golden visa programs affect existing applicants and their future interest?
That's a good question. Golden visa investors have legal rights enshrined in law in the underlying program laws. So the a new incoming government can't unilaterally decide that we're going to strip you of the rights you had under the program when you had invested um, under a particular set of requirements and rules. So the Portuguese authorities wanted to ram through the termination of that program, and I mean, what they basically were staring down was the biggest class action lawsuit in the industry. So um, then, after a bit of to and fro, they kind of backtracked and they were like, "Yes, cool. So whatever kind of benefits and privileges you enjoyed under the program would be grandfathered in and would be honored over time." So in the main, that has been well, I mean, okay, I'm saying in the main. When when Quebec cancelled its program, a whole lot of investors who had already applied were left in the lurch. And that left a very bad taste in a great many Chinese applicants' mouth. But yeah, in the main, the in recent years, when a program is shuttered, it's typically with a reasonable kind of notice period and with a sunset clause, giving people the ability to complete whatever transactions they have to complete. Case in point now is the Greek program, whereby um, uh, applicants had to put down a 10% deposit by a certain date last year and then complete their their property transactions by the end of 2024. There was such a tsunami of applications, and the bureaucratic offices dealing with things like, certificates of compliance and whatever else not was struggling to give these people what they needed in time. So the Greek authorities have actually postponed the deadline by about 2 months, I do believe now, um, to give people the ability to complete the transactions they'd started, and consequently to still qualify for the 250,000 euro price points. So yeah, as a rule of thumb, if programs were to get terminated, the rights and privileges investors enjoy would be grandfathered in.
In our remaining time, I want to mention a little bit about the digital nomad visas. So we've mentioned some of them, but I mean, do you want to sort of talk about the general landscape of digital nomad visas, who's offering them, and how they cater to the growing remote workforce, and what some of the other considerations are?
The pandemic was obviously a very challenging time for everybody, but what it did enable, or what it did create, was the understanding that people can work remotely effectively and efficiently. And that was kind of when the whole digital nomad visa movement started burgeoning worldwide. Um, Now, in Portugal, for example, the D7 visa was always available to applicants with passive income, not only people of retirement age. So what we found was that a large percentage, over 50% of the D7 visa applicants that we deal with in any given month were actually digital nomads or remote workers or whatever the case is. Um, and I mean, I say digital nomad, I mean remote workers, someone who wants to come and stay there for a year or 2 years, um, and is working for a foreign company remotely. So when the Portuguese authorities introduced the D8 visa program, which is the actual, fit for purpose visa regime for remote workers, from 1 month to the next, we started selling more D8 visas than we'd sold D7 visas the month prior. So for a long time, remote workers were applying for the D7 visa on the basis of passive income. But once that the D8 visa went live, the majority of the applicants were remote workers and digital nomads. The other thing that kind of factored into that was the fact that the tax benefits under the former non-habitual residency tax program were terminated for retirees as well. So it's Portugal is no longer as attractive a place from a tax perspective for retirees. So Spain also has a digital nomad visa, and that's one that's become very popular. I mean, Spain as a travel destination is very popular, so it kind of makes sense that there would be a high demand for that program too. Um, Also, fairly reasonable income requirements, and there are a great many platform players who are now giving you the ability to do it yourself, as it were, but with the support of a system that prompts you to, as to what the kind of formats of your documentation and your photos need to be. So yeah, I mean, I think that across Europe they're popular. Of course, when you have a digital nomad residency in Portugal, that enables you to spend some time in Greece or in Spain as well, because it's a visa-free travel area. So you will probably find that people, remote workers would go for the most accessibly priced program with the easiest requirements, and then use that as a platform to explore Europe, um, at their leisure.
It's certainly something that's so popular now. I mean, practically every week I run into people who are interested in becoming digital nomads. It's something which, I hear from people about their plans for doing that and their interest in doing that just by virtue of, where I'm situated in the immigration space. But it'll be very interesting to follow, whether that continues to be a popular trend and more countries continue to, create digital nomad visas. Certainly something we want to follow.
South Africa were keen on following suit on this as well, and then inevitably the conversation becomes: when does the digital nomad need to start paying taxes locally, and do they need to register for taxes before they get their residency permit? Um, an influx of digital nomads obviously have a inflationary impact on accommodation costs. So even though they do, have a lot of expendable income, and there is the economic multiplier effect at play when they come and stay in a place for in the midterm, um, you also do have unintended consequences, which even in Cape Town now has sparked a bit of a low level resistance to digital nomads and blowback against them. Spain has had the same thing in terms of its over tourism challenges.
That's one of the countervailing considerations, with over tourism and sort of rising accommodation costs and things like that becoming factors in the political debate. It remains to be seen. But I mean, you always have to wonder how big of a magnitude do the digital nomads have in any given location. I mean, it's something which we've heard discussed in Southeast Asia. We've heard discussed around the EU. And you say it's also an issue in South Africa. So but,
Well, a
those
perceived issue. I don't know.
a
Yeah,
perceived issue, right? And a lot of times it actually is because of the numbers of people that we're talking about. I mean, it's something which they're highly visible, which makes them, an attractive red herring, I think, but
a convenient scapegoat
a
indeed.
convenient scapegoat is a better way to put it, right? But the question is, what is the real tangible impact, on cost? That's a separate analysis. Um,
The availability or the dearth of stock locally is typically a bigger challenge. And I mean, Cape Town over the last 30 years have had uh, a supply side constraint when it came to rental accommodation. And the reality is that it's a compact city with not enough land between the sea and the mountain to build on. So yeah, it's. I mean, consequently, there are many areas that have been developed outside of the city center, but in the city bowl area and in the southern suburbs commercial district, it's a very compact space, physically speaking. So in those areas, rental accommodation is challenging to find, and I mean, as we speak today, that is the case in Cape Town too.
Now, Andre, I understand that as part of your services, you don't provide specific individualized tax advice, but by way of general information, are there any sort of major tax considerations that people should just be aware of?
Yeah, there actually are. And as one tax lawyer phrased it to me, you don't really want to be in Portugal if you're not covered by the non-habitual tax regime, which is an advantageous uh, tax regime which you can register for upon moving there. Um, the initial NHL program was terminated a while ago, and they've literally just launched the new NHL 2.0, which has pretty decent tax advantages for highly qualified people. It's sort of especially in the sort of research and technology, innovation and technology kind of space. But a big and obvious potential issue to be aware of is that if you are getting paid out of a tax haven, and Portugal has a list of tax havens that is substantially longer than the EU standard list. I mean, for example, if you're getting paid out of Dubai, for example, um, even if you were eligible to pay a flat tax of 20% income tax, personal income tax, based on the nature of the work you do under the NHR program, if you're getting paid out of a tax haven, as defined by the Portuguese tax authorities, then you would be hit with a flat tax rate of 48% straight off the bat. So that wouldn't even be a staged or a staggered kind of scale. So it is whether you go there as a digital nomad or as a retiree, it is absolutely vital to seek tailor-made tax advice before settling in Portugal because yeah, you could be in for a rude awakening otherwise.
No, that's a huge that's a hugely important issue, and I'm so glad that you mentioned it. And there are certainly a number of excellent sort of tax lawyers or international tax consultants who can advise, but definitely something to watch out for. Um, Now, do you want to mention just before we close about how D7visa.com actually assists clients in navigating the complexities of European immigration and what sets you apart?
A D7 visa, we kind of have a downselling ethos rather than upselling ethos. So uh, if a D7 visa, for example, were to work for your situation, I'm not going to try and sell you a golden visa. Having said that, it's for most people doing a kind of a plan B investment, it's not something they look into or work with every day. So we effectively help clients to navigate the landscape, to understand the differences between the programs, to understand the drawbacks and the benefits of each individual program, and then ultimately to to put them in touch, if it's not one of the programs we do in house, with highly qualified experts in country who can then assist them with the whole process. So yeah, ultimately, it's a large component of what we do is client education, in addition to the consulting work. But it's ultimately equipping clients to feel empowered to make the right decision for them. So that's the backbone of what we do.
So, Andre, we've really done a pretty good survey comparing programs across Europe. But are there any new products or anything new that you're really excited about that's coming up?
Indeed, there is. I mentioned the firm Visa Doro, who is responsible for the Startup Co-Investor Visa program previously. They are putting the finishing touches on a cancer research golden visa, which is going to be the first of its kind in that a donation towards cutting edge cancer research will also get you the benefit of treatment at a cutting edge research facility and treatment center in the event that you were to get diagnosed with cancer. And unlike conventional cancer insurance products, there's no pre-screening requirement. So ostensibly, even if you had a pre-diagnosed uh, oncological affliction, you could still benefit from treatment. So yeah, philanthropic giving in the sort of cancer research space is $1 billion industry, and I'm pretty excited to see how this is going to be received. It certainly is the first of its kind in the Portuguese market. So yeah, that should be live in the next week or two.
That's really fascinating, and Andre, we'll link to some information about that because it's a very exciting development. So thanks for bringing that up, and I'm sure we're going to have you back again because this is such a fascinating and evolving area. But I mean, what would sort of like your general predictions, in a general sense, be for like the next period, and let's say the next couple of years?
What has been a constant is that the programs that are available have become more expensive, and we've also lost a number of programs. I think the pendulum will swing back, and we will see the emergence of new programs, both golden visa and citizenship or investment oriented programs. But perhaps with the caveat that, given the housing crises across Europe, I think that being able to buy a property to get a golden visa will become the exception to the rule rather than the general norm. I mean, I felt that Latin America has been underrepresented in the citizenship or investment space for many years. And whilst I don't have a crystal ball, I would expect to see a citizenship or investment program outside of El Salvador's freedom visa passport program launch in the next year. I would certainly expect, as the impact of climate change starts hitting more small island nations, that we'll see or two more of those launch in the next year or two.
I know we focused today on the EU for the most part. Are you working with applicants for the Turkish program? Turkey has citizenship by investment as well.
Turkey is not really a core program for me. I mean, it's a decent program, and Turkey is a very livable country with a lot of resources and food security and wonderful kind of natural vistas and what have you. So I think it's a good program. There have been rumors that that will increase in price to $600,000 in the near future. That hasn't actually happened yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
They did
Um,
have one increase. They went from, I believe it was,
250 to
250 to
400.
400, yes. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that the general trend would be that these things become more restrictive and more costly. And quite frankly, I mean, Greece is a good example of this. They're now increasing in price, or they have increased in price. Um, so if you were going to wait to see what the outcome was of whether Trump got reelected before you make a decision on buying Greece or not, you're going to end up spending more money unless you buy the conversion category, which necessarily is not, an open market property. I'm aware that as someone who promotes these programs, me telling a client that they need to hurry up and pull the trigger um, looks like it could be self-serving. But I mean, I find it deeply frustrating because a lot of clients whom I dealt with over the years could have gotten their green cards in America for $500,000 rather than the $800,000 they now need to part with. Um, there was a time not too long ago when a hotel share scheme investment in Portugal would have cost you a meager 280,000 euros. And that's radical. Whereas if you now want to invest, it's 500,000 euros. So uh, fundamentally, I think that if anyone is serious about getting a decent plan B in place, the regulations and the conditions upon which they can get it today will probably be the best that they can expect to get it ever.
And it's not, yeah, and I hear you, and it's actually not just self-serving on your part to say. I mean, you're not the only person who's saying that. I mean, if you look over sometimes if you tune into Andrew Henderson at Nomad Capitalist, he talks about he,
Yes.
he talks about that as well. That if you're that it's there's not really time to waste if this is something you're seriously thinking about, and today's probably the best it's going to be for the foreseeable future.
By the same token, people are petrified of making a mistake. But I
Hmm.
mean, if you're going to buy a conversion property or any property in Greece, and you decide that you all of a sudden really grew allergic to Greek food and you hate island life, um, and you can't stand the sunshine anymore, then you could just resell your property. Or you could also, if you have reservations about actually owning a property offshore or abroad, you could do the bank deposit option. But then at any point, if you feel that this is no longer serving your interests, then you can just course correct and sell the property or take your money out of the bank account and move on with your life.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I think that the cost of inaction will be higher than the cost of action, all things being equal.
And on that note, that's a good note to leave it at for the time being. It's an area that, I love talking about, fascinating
Likewise,
area, and I'm sure, and of interest to a growing number of people, including a growing number of Americans. So Andre Bothma, uh, working in Cape Town, South Africa, and in Porto, Portugal. It's been a pleasure having you to talk about golden visas across Europe, and I'm sure we'll be speaking to you again. So thank you
I'd be
so much for
delighted.
joining us.
Thanks for
Yes.
having me.